clerical stuff that we have to
Hold on, if
do.
we're ready to move, let me do this. This is my first time, so.
Okay, so let's start off with getting
I've got my
the,
list, just let me follow my list. I need to do this, so I know where
I
to.
thought you guys, what were you guys doing this whole time?
I like to do that.
So this is recording.
yes it is.
Alrighty then. Okay. We're gonna call the meeting to order. It is 12:47 p.m. Roll call of board members.
Joe Campbell here.
Ellen Ray Bauer.
Charlotte Kiffer.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry, Joe, I should have given you a minute there to get up. We should have, we're going to have a call to the public and correspondence at this point, in case anybody has anything they want to say before we get started. Anybody in the public want to say anything? I think we'll do that again after the information too. So, okay, so we'll move on to item number 5A, discussion review of the 2019-2020 fiscal year budget projection of estimated revenues and expenditures. Possible review of a budget draft for 2019-2020 fiscal year budget.
All right, thank you. So before we get started here, a couple things. I didn't bring any printouts today because there's a lot of things I feel can change drastically depending on some of the things that come, not only come out of this budget meeting, but come out of your special meeting after this. And there's some decisions that kind of need to go back on to the board to determine some of the things that go in here. So what I will do though is after we do kind of agree upon a few tentative scenarios, I'll get out to the board, probably just via email, copies of the detailed budget. So what I kind of envision doing today is, what I want to do is start with some of our revenue pieces, specifically our property tax revenue and ambulance, and then really go on and focus on our non-personnel related costs, because really most of those expenses are what they are. There's not a lot of discussion involved around those. And then from there we can go in and kind of discuss the personnel piece of things and everything. So with that, right now, our tax revenue for next year, the only number that's in there still is just a placeholder, is our FDAT number, which we'll get from the county here. Usually we get that from the county, kind of the May, June timeframe. Usually we get it before we do tentative adoption. But our assessed value did go down. We went down less than 1%, but we did go down 0.92%, which equates to a decrease of $5,438 in tax revenue. So unfortunately, what that does is too, is I looked at kind of that compounded annual growth rate of our assessed value over the I went as far back as 2013, 2014, and we've actually got a negative 0.3 average change in our assessed value.
Since 2013?
Yeah, since 13, 14.
What's that number again?
0.30. So that's important because that's what we have to kind of base our future projections on, as well as we develop and make decisions within this budget process. Obviously, our future budgets are changing numbers, but it's always important that decisions we make today, we always look at how, based on our current knowns, what that future impact is. So that's where kind of tax levy revenue is. You can see the delinquency. I'm very conservative on doing too much on the delinquency here. I increased it from 92% collected to 95% collected, which changed about $400. Hopefully you know, this year we've seen some pretty good collections. And if we continue to see positive trends like that, we can continue to increase our delinquency, or reduce our delinquency, and increase that current year collections. But so, yeah.
Question about that. We're shifting to an organization that's going to collect our medical monies.
Right.
And you've seen their reports and you're real pleased with them.
Yeah.
Does it matter which company is collecting? Do you see maybe the company Pine Top uses collects more than we've seen with Mediclaim? Doesn't matter at all, depends on the moon and the stars.
So right now, I'm speaking specifically to tax revenues, but to answer your question though, so Michael Sheridan at MDS does a very good job of billing, and I do believe there is some value in what you pay for his fees. However, I don't believe we're going to see enough, I'm sorry, the company that you've chosen to go to does as well of a job, or does a good job, and utilizes more of the technology piece. And yes, we may see a small decrease in our collection percentage, but that's going to be way offset by the savings that we're going to realize on the billing side.
On the cost of doing the billing.
Correct.
Right, okay.
No, good question. Good question. No, good question. So on that ambulance revenue, what we're looking at there, so I've got 290,000, and you know what? I'm noticing looking up there the green and the black. It's a little hard to see. Better?
Yeah.
Actually, I'll probably go up another point there on the Zoom. There we go. So right now I have in the budget 290,000 in projected ambulance revenue. When I look at our 3-year average, we're actually at 293. If I annualize out this current year, we're looking at 300. But really I'm thinking we want to stay, so I did bump it up to 290, which is kind of splitting that difference a little bit and still being conservative on that ambulance revenue piece. Miscellaneous revenue, bless you. Our average is, 7,500, but that's really because of previous 2 fiscal years ago. What's in there for those years in 15, 16, 16, 17? But really, 10,000, we're not going to hit 10,000 this year. We'll probably hit about 1,600 this year. So I've just lowered that miscellaneous revenue to 1,500.
What falls under miscellaneous revenue?
Pull it up for the prior. Do that. Well, one of them was a credit for Policy Logic's payment back in 2016.
That's where donations would go too, correct?
Yeah, donations.
What was the first thing you just said? I didn't catch that.
Oh,
Interest something or other?
Policy Logic. That was John Flynn.
Oh.
Because it was back in 2016, not this current year.
Right.
And so it's just some, and donations, sometimes some vendor refunds that we'll get. So that's what's kind of going in there. So that's why that's lowered down to really what we're experiencing this year, not so much what we've seen in the past. Fire service income, keeping it at about $2,000. Asset disposal, right now I don't have anything on the books as far as disposal of assets, so drop that down to 4 unless Chief, you got something.
I didn't get you those figures for the 2 trucks that we sold.
We sold them this year though, right? Yeah. Yeah, but we don't have anything slated to dispose of next year though.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Will we get that money this year, this fiscal year?
We should be seeing a check any day now.
Okay.
Because it usually lags 30 to 45 days from the end of the auction, which was at the end of February.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Interest income, we used to keep that at 0, because we didn't have any money. But now that our cash balance has grown, this year we're gonna probably annualize out to $7,500. But that's also because interest rates have been pretty favorable this year, while most economists still anticipate interest rates continuing to rise. I don't like to get too aggressive on those types of revenue, but I did plug in 5,000, which I feel is a very safe and reasonable number. Right now, I've got no placeholder in there for grant revenue, but either way, when we do put that in, we put in the offsetting expense over the wash, so it won't impact any of our discussions today. Let's see here.
So if it's a wash, because I'm figuring once you get down into payment, it'll show the 30,000. So if you subtract that, if you remove that, then we're looking at like a plus of less than $1,000.
Say that again?
If you take out the line for grants.
Oh, yes, I get what you're saying, yeah, so if, just for the sake of discussion, what you're trying to look at, yeah, if I take out that, we're looking at that plus of about $829. Yeah, so, but this is last year, so I'm gonna put it back in there, but yeah, you're right, I'm sorry.
No problem.
So I'm gonna skip personnel right now, we'll come back to that.
Right.
So we've got buildings and land. So this makes up our utilities, station and janitorial supplies, and buildings, repairs, and maintenance. As far as utilities, I did bump that up about $2,000, as you can see from the current year. And the reason for that being is that's what we're actually trending to hit this year for utility expenses. Our 3-year average is $20,000, so we've historically been in line with that average, but this year, right now, it looks like we're trending up, and we haven't hit the summer months yet where we're using more AC and everything. So, bump that up. Same thing with station and janitorial supplies. That 3-year average has actually been around $1,500. This year, we've already spent $2,000, and look at actually hitting about $3,000.
Cost of things up?
Costs have been going up. That's a line item that we're bumping up across the state right now.
Wow.
So I attributed a lot of that to just cost of goods. Buildings and land, I dropped that down due to our actual spending over the last 3 years. In our current year, we're annualizing to about $3,000. But again, with Chief, there may be some projects that we may want to increase that if we can. But
The only one, we had the $10,000 place marker in there that was slated for the roof. We ended up spending that on the paint. The roof is still an issue. We never could get a solid set of bids for the roof. I'm thinking that we may end up just having to go up there and do something ourselves.
okay.
But I think the 5, for that one particular item, I think the 5 is good. I don't know of any other projects that are coming down the pike that are problems or issues as far as building maintenance and repair is concerned.
Okay.
But the 10,000, that's the one that we bumped up for
Right.
the roof repair.
Specific, yeah. Any questions on buildings and land? That's pretty easy, straightforward category there. Oops. Vehicles and equipment. So, and one thing I'll point out, I know, one of the big questions Ellen's had a lot of is the more detail and stuff like that. So one thing that, and again, from a management reporting, board request on details, I think that this information will be available. As far as it being in the public finance board packet, it won't normally be. You're going to see again more of the roll up. But under utilities and then under any station or janitorial supplies that are specifically bought for a station or buildings and repairs, everything will be coded out to a station.
Cool.
So we'll be able to run a report of cost by station, and you'll be able to see, what our costs are by station. And on that note, the same thing with our vehicle fuel reports. I haven't seen the vehicle fuel reports, to be honest with you, but I don't think they show it by vehicle, or maybe they do.
We're supposed to.
With the new fuel cards,
They'll get it.
they should be vehicle specific.
Okay,
The only fuel reports, when they go up and fuel at the school, they're supposed to be vehicle specific, but that's handwritten.
okay.
So I put more faith in the global fleet reports that we get from, and not only has the date, the time, the employee that filled up the vehicle, and the vehicle that was fueled,
Okay,
and the mileage of the vehicle.
okay,
So those cards I believe, are vehicle specific,
okay,
but I haven't looked at the detailed report to see if they break it out.
okay.
Vehicle specific.
So typically we don't do fuel vehicle specific with most of our clients, but if it is something we can do, if the reports do give us that ability, then it's something that can be done on here. But definitely vehicle maintenance will go by vehicle. So if we do engine repairs on ambulance, you know, it'll go in there. And so you'll still see again on a month-to-month basis our top line vehicle maintenance expense, but then there could be a separate fleet report that shows how much was spent per vehicle.
Okay, good.
So fuel, I did bump up fuel by about $1,000, and that's just fuel prices we have seen them increase. They've kind of come back down again a little bit, but we're gonna still see volatility there.
They just spiked again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
19 is Chevron.
So right now we're looking, I mean, if we stay on our current trend, we're actually gonna hit 28,000 this year. But I'm thinking if we plug in 25 and just kind of watch it, I mean, if we do end up a few grand over in that item, it's not gonna really sway us either way. Vehicle maintenance, our average is about 35. This year we're gonna hit 37, but I know we've had some other big repairs. So I think keeping our vehicle maintenance at 35 is a reasonable number there. Shop tools and supplies, I bumped that up a little bit. Again, just our actual average has been about $500,000 or $500 over the last 3 years.
Oh, that's a nice shot.
So I did bump that up to really reflect what we have been spending there. Fire equipment maintenance and fire equipment is one, again, just kind of bringing those back down to where not only our average has been, but what our actual expected expense is this year as well.
I noticed we've run way under budget on a lot of those items. It's good to see them brought back down.
Yeah. Same thing with EMS supplies. Even with our increase in revenue, we're still looking at only hitting about 20,000 this year in total EMS supply expense. And then the ambulance lease purchase and the EMS lease purchase, which is the cardiac monitors, are just kind of what they are. That is the debt service payments due that year.
So under those categories, I mean, we have a list of aging and soon to be updated equipment. Is that where we'd be looking to plug that in if we needed to purchase or lease or?
So I'll cut to the bottom line. We don't have any money for that. So any of those things, we're going to have to look at either utilizing our reserve funds or look at grant opportunities. You know. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But I should rephrase my statement there. Based on our current assumptions and current things in the budget. So that could change based on later discussions, as I mentioned before. That's why there's not hard copies to get out and disseminate, because this is still very much a very rough working document.
Right.
So.
Okay.
What is our reserve projected for the end of the fiscal year?
Over here. 531. Yeah.
And what is the maximum debt we are allowed?
Well, there's no, actually, so lease purchase debt, there is no maximum. I mean, other than what the bank will finance and what your budget can afford to pay. County line of credit is statutorily limited to, I want to say 40% of your levy,
Okay.
which we've got $100,000 line of credit in the county.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's
I thought it
100,000.
was 75.
What? It's either 75 or 100,000, yeah.
What did we do,
It's the Chase line of
the
credit.
Chase line of credit, I think it came back at 75. I
Okay.
didn't think it came in at 100, it came in at 70. I think we were shooting for 125
Yeah,
initially, and I think when all the paperwork and everything came through, it was at 75.
okay.
But the lease doesn't count as,
No, that doesn't count on that, right.
And you only go to the line of credit if you've expended all your funds. Right.
Yes.
Right.
That's your
Which
last
we've
ditch.
got, yeah.
Right.
We're in desperate.
we don't
Yeah.
want to go into that.
No,
No.
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 And even like last year, the lowest we got was 300, or this year I should say, was 370,000 in September.
In that reserve fund? 270,
So
So, I'm sorry, say that again. So
the lowest we got was 370,000.
in September of 18?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all funds. So that's not just reserve, that's all of our funds.
Oh.
So, well, we only have two accounts. We have the general fund of the county and then we have our Wells Fargo.
Okay.
So in all cash.
Which, and just as an FYI, we might see a dip in that more this year after this fiscal year.
Yeah, we're
We're
projecting.
gonna see a dip in that because we're gonna go into the
10 grand.
non-tax collection rent months from between now and September, so we're in those non-collection.
Right.
And then with the change, I mean, the change in the medical billing, we'll probably see a dip, but then it'll come back up once
Yeah.
they start,
Once they get
once
everything.
we
kind of
start
back up.
processing.
Yep. So we'll see a little bit of fluctuation in that this year.
Plus our attorney's fees.
Well, we're not there yet. I mean, you guys are jumping ahead on me.
Talking about dipping.
And so any other questions on our vehicle and equipment
No.
line items? But one thing, I think you bring up a good point, Charlotte, and it's something that we need to be cognizant of and address is how are we going to fund those capital needs? Because those capital needs aren't going anywhere. Our equipment is gonna continue to get older. And so that's something we gotta think about. And, you know, unfortunately, when we get to the kind of projection stuff and everything, I think there's some really hard decisions and things this board needs to contemplate, you know, going forward, so. Communications and IT systems, again, when I'm looking at these line items here, we kind of went through and reviewed our historical spending, where we're at this year, and, you know, really we're looking at about needing about 1,500 in communications, which is, you know, really just phone service. Computer equipment and support, we bumped that up last year because of some purchases that were needed and some upgrades. And so brought that back down to about the $5,000 mark, which is in line with, you know, where our average is. And Chief, did we get any changes or anything with dispatch?
I have been waiting for the projections from Kingman Dispatch to find out what the increase is gonna be this year.
Okay,
We just got the quarter bill from them and it's exactly the same, but I can't imagine that there's not going to be an increase. I think there's a built-in increase of a few percent a year. And they are moving over to upgrading their systems and doing some other things. So in that, and I don't know if you want to put this in dispatch expenses or not, but historically, they provided the text messaging for the personnel.
right.
And with their new Akata system or whatever they're going to, we're paying, we're gonna have to start picking up that cost. And right now, it's $130 per year, so it's nominal.
Yeah,
And I don't see that expense going up to be astronomical, but that's just an extra expense that we've had to take on through the dispatch, through their new system.
okay. Yeah, so we'll probably plug it in there,
I
just
haven't-
because it is dispatch contract and other expense,
And I haven't seen the contract this year. It's kind of uncommon for them not to have the contract out. There was some discussion, but there was no, this is what your numbers are gonna look like for the next year.
Yeah.
But
Okay. All right, well, right now I've just got our current cost in there as the placeholder.
I mean, you could, I would project 3%,
Yeah,
just as a place marker, until we get the hard figures.
that's a good bet. Perfect. Any questions there?
No.
Meetings and training. On here, again, looking at where we've been spending on average, where we're at this year. Starting off with 6810, our meetings and business expense. We've only spent on average about a couple $100 in this line item. This year we're on track to spend about 400. So I lowered it to 500 to kind of be, about where I think we're going to be going forward.
Is that with the mileage?
Yeah.
Is included?
Yeah.
Okay.
Board training, again, looking at what we have spent historically on board training. 1,500, this year's the highest dollar amount we've spent on board training, well, ever. And it was right at 1,500, so that's why that's right there,
So you
1,500.
need to go over, had three members training this year.
Yeah, exactly.
New ones.
Employee training, I need a number to plug in there. We've not ever really spent anything there, chief. So we need to kind of,
We really haven't been in a position where we could send employees out to like state fire schools and trainings and stuff like that.
We will have a new chief, so we probably should actually plug something in there for AFTA, because he's gonna have to go to AFTA, he or she, is gonna have to go to AFTA.
And that's gonna be in Prescott.
Is that official?
I don't know.
Oh,
I'm asking you.
no, it's gonna probably be in Mohave again.
No, I mean the summer session.
Oh, the summer session, oh, that'd be awesome if it was in Prescott. I think it's in Glendale again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought they do the hot part in Phoenix, which makes no sense to me.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do 1,000 there then for training, for employee training.
It'd be a good place marker just to have, I'm sure it
Yeah.
could.
Yeah. And then prevention and public education, we could probably look at, I already bumped that one down to 1,500, it's been at 2,500. The most we've ever spent in there over the last 4 years was this year, we spent $687. And so that's why I kind of put it in 50. I lowered it a little bit, but still leaving a place marker in there for that program.
Is that like the things they do at the school with the booklets and stuff for fire safety?
Yeah.
And we bought, I can't remember, we gave them out at the beginning of the year, 130 of them. I think we have some left, but we will not, we won't exceed the 1,500. Even if we replaced everything, like you said, we spent $670, and that was for the fair, the 50th anniversary fair, and the school. We did both. We handed out helmets, fire helmets and packets and coloring books, etc. at both events.
Right.
So,
And that was a good thing.
yeah, I was just saying, I don't see the cost.
Right.
It was $600 and something, we could replace everything that we,
Yeah.
that, for the same amount, maybe a few dollars more with new year pricing, but
So maybe even take that to 1,000 then?
That's what I'm thinking.
I think, yeah, you might be able to bump that down to 1,000.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Look at us saving money.
Yay.
Any questions then on the meetings and training? Okay. Managerial costs. This is where it starts to get a little more discussion. So starting off with our expenses up here on managerial. So we've got our payroll service. That is just what we pay for direct deposit fees through QuickBooks. So that's what that number is. Ambulance collection fees, this is a calculated number based upon our projected revenue and our contracted collection rate of 3.95%. So that's huge.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. Then we come down to our uniforms. I dropped that down $100. That's about what we're gonna spend this year, assuming we've typically been around 1,000 to 1,500, with the exception of last fiscal year. We spent about 7,000 in that line item. Legal, we'll come back to that, but that's killing us right now. We typically see districts of your size around the 10,000 to 15,000 mark. When I'm seeing the 30 and 40 mark, we're talking, the $10 million districts. So we need to really, I don't know how we fix that, but that's definitely going to be a point of further discussion.
I think we just fire the attorney and that'll be fine.
Professional services is on the audit and our fees. There is a small increase in audit prep fees going up next year from the auditor, and that's what that reflective changes there.
Can you tell me what it is now, what it will be?
I think it's like 65 and it's going to 95, and he's still one of the cheapest that do fire district audits. Actually, he is by the cheapest that
Have
is.
you looked at Saunders? He used to do ours all the time. And he was,
I'm just going to flat out say it, Saunders' reports are grossly inaccurate in most cases, yeah. Yeah, there's every audit that every client that we've picked up that was using Saunders, there's always prior period adjustments because things like fixed assets aren't included, things like receivables aren't, they're major issues with the audit reports. Yeah. But yes, he's probably is a little bit cheaper, although he does charge to come to the board meeting.
right.
So I don't know how much of a difference it'll really be, but it's, in my opinion, not a.
And I know with other districts, he's charging travel as well.
Yeah, he's charging travel, both to come for the audit, as well as to come and then present at the audit, to present to the board as well.
Okay, how about you fall under professional services?
We do, yes.
And what are we this year versus next year?
There's no change in our pricing, so we still charge the $1,500 a month, and then we've got our audit prep fee in there as well, and there's no change on that.
Okay.
You guys have had a few of the hourlies, but not enough, in my opinion, to really push the marker on changing that pricing, changing the budget.
For this year, what has fallen under the hourly? What things have you been doing?
Some PSPRS related issues,
Couple of special reports.
couple of special reports for the board.
How about the chief had mentioned the billing issue with Mediclaim stop the end of January?
Yeah, I didn't charge you for any of it. Oh, there was some stuff, we have charged a little bit for some of the conversion to the new billing company, because there was some upfront work there, but then that's been it. Chief's been taking over everything from here. That's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, appreciate that.
Okay. Office supplies are, for some reason, station supplies and janitorial supplies have shot up. Office supplies, we're seeing the decline around the state. So I lowered that to kind of match again more of what we've spent historically, as well as what we're projected to spend this year. Postage, though, has gone up. So although we haven't been spending, we've been budgeting, and as well as kind of with some of the assumption of some of the changing in the billing, I've kind of left our postage about where it's been at, because I think we've got a good number in there, I'm hoping. And if we go over by $100 in postage, it's not going to break the bank. Printing and reproduction, that kind of spiked, and that may have been for some one-time things. I'm sorry, that's again, I did increase that a little bit based on our average spend. But if we don't think we've got anything coming up, we may want to drop that back down to maybe even $500.
Our printing and reproduction costs have spiked because of the size of the packets and the size of the associated documents that have gone into the packets over the past several months. So
Good point, Chief.
we have been burning through paper, toner, and drums, printer drums, like water. So I expect if the trend continues, I see those expenses rising.
All right.
Because I know
Just
we've
leave it in there. Yeah.
gone through several, like I said, way more toner cartridges and drums and paper than we have in the past.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we'll leave that in there, and it's really only, between what we budgeted this year and the increase, it's only $400. I think it's okay to leave unless anybody has any major heartburn about that.
I'm thinking that'll decrease because I'm hoping we can get things evened out here where we're not having these huge packets that we have to deal with.
Yes. And that's gonna be compounding on this one too.
Yes. Yes.
Dues and subscriptions, again, we're gonna spend about $1,300 this year. I'm gonna leave that at the $1,800. Interest, I don't, again, anticipate any borrowing on the line of credit, even with, some of the stuff the chief mentioned. We will go lower this year.
Yeah.
We will get closer to that $0, but I don't think we'll actually need the line of credit. Public information, just bump that up a little bit because of some actual spending. Bank service fees have actually gone down, so I did lower that as well.
Wow, that's incredible.
Liability insurance, we don't have our quote back, and actually what we should probably do is put about a 3% bump in there as a placeholder.
Right. I know the fraud insurance bumped it up $400 and some.
Right, but we haven't had any major claims. Oops. If I put in the right formula. There we go. And then finally, do we have an election this year?
Yes.
Oh, we
Yes.
do?
In 2020, my position and Director Cass's position.
Well, in 2020, but that's November of 2020, right?
November of 2020 at the.
Yeah, so we don't have an election this budget year.
Cool. Oh, okay.
Beautiful.
So we can take that out.
So, oops, I just overrode my worksheet here. Staff is getting pissed at me.
Messing up the formulas.
Yeah, they'll be like, why do you guys do all this work and you overrode it? So here's what we're looking at. So on managerial, we're seeing an increase of 14,000. Really, we're seeing an increase of 30,000 in our budgeted legal. And because we're based on our annualized, we're looking at hitting 45 this year if we keep up this current trend.
No, we're not.
We
My
have,
dead body.
we have not received the bill from the attorney that includes the cost from December through March. That has not come in yet. And what we paid in from September through November for that period, we got 2 separate bills, but when you combine them, that just in that period alone, it was about $14,500. Now, a lot of the, in my opinion, a lot of the issues related to that cost have now passed. And so, but it was stunning because I realized the second bill wasn't December through March. It was
Right.
really the same period.
Right, when you're like, this doesn't even cover where we're at today.
So no. So I have no clue. I'm hoping that's available to us at our regular meeting because we had asked the attorney to send that.
Yeah.
And to send us monthly bills because, we didn't understand why we weren't getting monthly bills.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking at that figure, but, it's because of extenuating circumstances that I don't think will be the case into the next fiscal year. So I'm thinking budgeting 40,000 is unnecessary. That's just me. I'm one of 4, soon to be 5 people. So, but, we haven't even hit the end of the year. And I know we're going to go into, we talked about, or at least I mentioned maybe going into the reserve to pay that part off. But under legal, I don't think, I would recommend it come down to 15.
Yeah, I'm with 15. I was thinking that myself. I don't see it going anywhere near where it was this year because we don't have the things going on that we had going on last year.
Are we under, what's it? Expenses, no, I'm just looking at total expenses through March. We're over budget by, year to date. So year to date, we're actually only over budget by 7,200 on expenses, but our Yeah, so, I mean, and I'm talking total expenses, and right now our revenues track at 40,000 ahead. So, yeah, but a big chunk of that's property tax.
I thought the tax was projected to go down.
That's for the.
No, this is for this year, Ellen, I'm talking about this year, I'm talking, because you're talking about using reserve to pay for it.
Right.
I don't think that, I don't anticipate us basically going in the negative to pay those bills this year.
So in light of that, Gabe, can we lower that legal from 40,000 to, let's say, 15?
That makes me happier.
Makes me happier.
I have some fear, could we maybe split that difference and go to 20?
And we'd have some play in there if we didn't spend that money.
Oh, of course.
You could use it somewhere else.
Right.
Still.
Right.
Okay. Joe, what do you think? 20, budgeting 20,000 for legal this coming year versus 40? Because we're not gonna, right now we're over 7,200 in terms of what we've gone over. We haven't gotten the bill from December through the end of March.
From who?
From the attorney.
From the attorney?
From the attorney. So without that bill from December through March, right now we're over, we budgeted 10,000, so we're at about 17,500 right now this year, this fiscal year.
Right.
And there were things that were happening that required a lot of his services, and we don't expect that'll happen in the coming year. So he projected 40,000, and we're saying, can we just make it 20,000? Because we don't
Okay.
think it'll be that much. Good with that?
20,000 works for me.
Okay.
Anything to lower it.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right.
So how did we get to minus 5,000?
Well, so we've decreased our managerial expenses over last year by $5,932. And that's the big,
Oh, okay.
mainly because of our changing ambulance billers.
Right. Okay.
Oh, and cutting out election.
Right,
But we still increased legal, we still increased professional a little bit, but everything else stayed about the same.
okay,
Okay?
yep.
So now, I'm glad that's kind of the direction we're going, and we want to really manage that thing going into next year, because because like I said before, with that number that was in here before, we were at a deficit budget, or basically barely break even. We weren't at a deficit, we were basically at a barely break even budget. So, good. Now,
And we're also, just to kind of add to this, the board was pretty strong about you don't contact the attorney unless you go through the chair, board members, and except for setting up meetings of staff.
Right.
So we were trying to put a control on, do we really need to make that call? Can we do an email, which is less than making a phone call? What are the things that we can do on this end to kind of minimize that?
right.
So that's, I think, the direction we're continuing in.
Okay, good. So now we go to our staffing. Hold on a second here. Not that there's really any public here, but there's public meeting.
There's public here.
Yeah, well,
Right.
former board members.
Right.
So, here is our current employee roster, employee staffing model, I should say, because most of these fall-time firefighters, we don't have anybody in those slots. But here's basically our current staffing as we stand. So we've got the fire chief position in there, and at the current pay rate. We've got our office administrator in there at the current pay rate. And remember, there was some discussion about additional monies within that line item?
Right.
And a lot of things come to me when I'm in the shower.
I
But where I think there may have been that confusion is I think maybe you thought that she was budgeted as a part-time position, but we actually budgeted as a full 2080 position.
Yeah.
So I think that may have been where there may have been some of that, but,
Just to refresh my board members, I had asked Gabe, because probably around June of last year,
yeah.
and we were looking at where can we get money for the firefighters? How can we increase the hourly? Where are there monies that may be available? And I knew we had budgeted for full-time, 32 hours.
Yeah.
But I thought I recalled and said to Gabe, did I hear wrong? or did I hear right, did you tell me in that line item there was an additional 20,000?
Yeah.
And I asked him just recently, because I'm looking at where is there money that we can pull from, and he said, no, there was no additional 20,000 in that line item, so that's what he was referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do we got far right there for total cost with all the,
Total cost with roll-ups, well, one thing that's not in here is healthcare costs on the roll-up piece because I don't have the new census.
oh,
I have a placeholder in the budget for overall healthcare costs,
okay.
but I don't have it broken down by employee yet.
Right, okay.
But that's 26,934.
Can you make that
Plus-
darker, please?
Oh, yeah,
It's just something.
make it,
Yeah, make
there
it
you go,
darker,
thanks.
yeah, it was kind of light for me, sorry.
okay, oh, you're good.
So it's 26,934 plus health cost.
Correct.
That's for the total staffing?
Oh, no, that's for the admin position. Did you want total staffing?
No, I
Okay.
just want to make sure I get it in the right spot. So 26,934 is total, is for just the admin.
Right, and then
Chief and,
chief and admin is 115,807. And
I'm not seeing the 236, I'm sorry. Where-
236.
Didn't you say 236?
26,934.
Oh, boy, I wrote that on this. Okay.
And then chief at 88,873 fully loaded. And I'm assuming a tier 1 chief as well from a PSPRS cost standpoint.
Is that what, Chief, you are, Pier 1?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, most of your chiefs are going to have been in the system long enough that they're still tier 1.
So when you mentioned, I think I'd asked that question at last meeting, when you gave me like a 93,000 figure for the chief position. I'm looking at 88, plus health.
Plus healthcare.
Plus health, that's
Oh,
right.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
that's right.
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just wanted to understand.
And also there is a placeholder in for, based on our current rates for workers' comp, which we don't have our current rates yet until we get this decided, and then we'll be able to get that from 7710, or Copper Point. Well, 7710 or Copper Point?
Copper Point,
Copper Point, right.
we were looking at 7710, and then we held off, and then
There wasn't much of a savings, if I remember.
It wasn't
correctly.
much of a savings, and I did have some conversations at AFTA with a few other people in administration, and they liked 7710, but they said they were difficult to deal with when it came to claims.
Yeah.
And they were not getting the kind of customer service. And I know we've had our misgivings with Copper Point.
Yeah.
And they've been very difficult in some areas to deal with, but I don't know if we're just switching one bad for another bad,
Right.
one area for another area, so I don't think it's gonna make much of a difference moving forward.
No, that was a conclusion we came to years ago, and we went through the same thing.
Well, 7710's new to the area, and they've been catching a lot of clients, and they're doing a good job. And they are a little bit cheaper, but like I said, from what I've heard, on the claims process standpoint, from one administrator that I talked to, they had explained to me that they were having some difficulty with communication.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have difficulty with Copper Point in different areas.
Yeah. Again, it's
With our audits, which are just,
yeah. And
we've never had a smooth audit through Copper Point, and which has been a big sticking point for me. It's like, well, if they can't get it together, let's move somewhere else. But like I said, you would be exchanging one bad for another bad.
Right. And unless there's a big savings, it doesn't make sense to change.
Right, exactly.
You know, so,
Not
and,
that hassle.
and when we looked, it wasn't a big savings, so. So going down, what we've got on the personnel staffing here on our full-time firefighters, we've got slotted for, 6 positions here, 3 paramedics, 3 EMTs, firefighter EMTs, 3 firefighter paramedics, and the rate, the current, board-approved rates. And then basically kind of based on our historical usage of overtime for our full-time employees, which that's changing right now because we have a small number of full-time employees. But again, this budget's based upon the assumption of a full roster.
So we have 6 full-time positions.
Correct. Going into July 1, we'll have 1 full-time position filled.
So the other guys are just part-timers, POCs?
Yeah, and I'll talk about POCs in a second.
Okay,
Um,
so,
You actually have, the actual model was 9 positions.
right,
6 that we can fill within the budget, and the other 3 would be backfilled with POCs. That's how it all ran out.
and right now we just have one full-time?
July 1, right?
July 1, you'll have 1.
What do we have that's?
2.
Oh, we'll have 2?
Well, you're talking suppression.
Suppression, yeah.
1,
What do we have as of today?
2.
So we're losing some.
We're losing, potentially losing 1 more. I won't speak for him, he'll have to speak for himself.
Okay. Okay, all right.
So that's our full-time roster, or our budget with, basically, again, our average usage of overtime for our full-time employees, or historically, to calculate an overtime budget for full-time, of 950 hours. So that is kind of our full-time piece. Total cost of, 368,000. One thing I did do on here is, I did put in the assumption of tier 3 firefighters, which is the lowest PSPRS rate for those new hires. And while I'm talking about PSPRS, we actually had really good news this year from PSPRS. We went from, effectively almost a 46% contribution rate down to a 33% contribution rate, which is a 37% overall decrease.
Wow. And that's gonna help us.
Yes. So, there was actually some good news there on the PSPRS front.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting you.
Okay.
I'm questioning about POCs.
You see, he's jumping at me.
What's that?
You're jumping at him.
I know, I'm gonna stop myself.
Fine.
I stop myself.
So going down to POCs, they're down here. So we've got our firefighter paramedic POCs, and I looked at the last 3 years of usage of our POCs as far as how many are firefighters, how many are paramedics, how many are EMTs, and by far we use way more paramedic POCs than we do EMT POCs. So explaining to you what we've done here is, what I did is, the number of hours required to staff both stations 24/7, all right? But then I discount the fact that most days we're not able to cover Meadview. And then that gives us that we need 23,000 hours of staffing a year to basically maintain minimum coverage.
Now, is that, how many days covered is that for Meadview?
That's Meadview covered right now at 125 days.
Out of 365?
Yeah.
Because we're trending more than that, or we were trending more than that over the past couple of years, right? Because we were trending, what, 23 days a month out of 30?
Yeah, I'll be honest, our 3-year average on staffing overall is even less than the 23 hours that we've got in there.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I know the first year was very slim.
This year we're right now, based on the first quarter, we're only going to cover 20,000 total hours, based on how the first quarter went. And then that 3-year average, we're at 23.5, which is right where we've got our kind of required hours. So,
What does generate that into days,
oh geez,
roughly?
I don't know. I can't. Well, let me do this.
What's the required, where does the requirement come from?
Basically staffing, it's just calculating the number of hours based on the number of days of personnel needed to staff.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah.
It's not like a
It's not like a
Federal
policy or anything like
policy,
that.
yeah,
No.
okay.
So that's what kind of makes up this budgeted line item for POCs. One thing you'll notice I did here, this is current rate, this is an increase in rate, and would be the rate for next year. One thing you'll notice is POC EMTs have got a 47-cent bump because minimum wage January 1 is $12 an hour.
Right.
We could see a small savings, but only, we're only gonna see about $1,500 savings if we wait till January 1 to do that, just because we're not using that many POCs. And then, same thing on our POC mechanic, is currently at 11 an hour, so bump that up the dollar to get them up to the minimum wage, which we have to do.
This is where my question comes in.
Okay.
At our last meeting, you had mentioned the POCs that were not making the 12 an hour.
Mhm.
Is that, I don't want to, I didn't get the minutes, so I don't want to misquote.
No.
And
You're fine.
the board had said we wanted them to be paid 12. That's where that big budget thing came last year, about
Yes.
Yeah.
raising up to 12 an hour.
Yes.
What happened that they weren't paid $12 an hour?
Well, that's where I had tried to explain that when I went back and I looked at where I thought every firefighter was at 11.55. That was my misconception, because when I looked at the pay scale and we got the pay scale, the POC firefighters were at 11. They were not at 11.55. The full-time EMTs were 11.55. I thought they started everybody at 11.55. They did not. That was my mistake. So when everything came through, it was 11.53 for the firefighter EMTs, the POCs.
Right.
Because we only authorized, the board only authorized that 53 cents.
Right.
So we were not allowed to go and make any more expenditures there. So, and then like I explained at the last meeting, the fact that we're not using them, it's not gonna impact the budget either way, because we're just not using, we're not utilizing, we only have one or two EMT POCs still on their books, every other one's a paramedic.
Yeah, and let's face it, we're not filling those full-time slots anyways. I want to continue to budget for them, so we have the ability to fill them. But really, that's where our budget is for our POCs, from a practical standpoint, is in our full-time line item, which is more than that. But I just want to make sure, if ideal world, we're able to fully staff, we're able to fully cover, that's what we're able to fully cover.
Right.
Could we calculate in there like a per diem allowance for employees working in Meadview to encourage more of them to want to work in Meadview? Because they have to drive their own personal vehicles up there. That's like an extra 60 miles round trip from here. If they're coming from Kingman, Kingman's a little different.
Where they could take Stockton Hill Road, but
Yeah.
I get your point.
But,
What incentive can we offer?
yeah, incentives so they want to work there. And what I was thinking, the federal allowance for fuel only is 20 cents a mile, and that would just be $12 a day. And even if that was full-time, 365 days, it would be less than $5,000 a year.
Yeah, we'd have to evaluate that from a labor rule standpoint. I know like, some like the private ambulance companies and stuff will give a stipend or a bonus for like non-emergency transports for their employees or something like that. So there might be a way to work something in like that, but also I understand a lot of it's just can't get people to come in at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, that's what it's.
But yeah, I mean, that's always something that can be looked at.
I was just thinking, if we had that in place, and then as we work on building our personnel base in general, and that would already be in place for anybody that's willing to go there, because that's like been number one bugaboo. Nobody wants to go to Meadview.
Nobody wants to drive that far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's actually the opposite. They want to work in Meadview.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Quieter
Because
station?
There's quieter stations.
Nothing to do.
They're not transporting. So, actually, it's like Dave said, it's not that we're not getting people that want to work in Meadview, it's we don't have the numbers to fill that station. The
I've had
numbers are
personal
going.
conversations with several different people through the years that did not like working there at all because it freaks them out to get a call. And then one guy, what's he supposed to do? Can't fight a fire, can't save a life, what are we supposed to do?
Well,
So-
then that guy doesn't deserve the certifications.
What do you think, Chief, I'm hearing they like working up there. What do you think?
I don't
you
think giving them a stipend is gonna make a difference in coverage either way.
It wouldn't hurt to have it sit there then, would it? Nobody'd be using it.
It's like, he's gonna have to look at it from a labor standpoint.
Right.
I don't know if there would be any difference in there. And then you may see a shift where it's like, well, if I can get an extra $12 to go to Meadview now, everybody wants to go to Meadview. It's like, well, you can't, because we have to staff,
Sure.
Dolan has to have 2 personnel.
Right.
And if I don't have, you know, these guys that want to work in Meadview, I'm pulling them down to Dolan to work in Dolan.
Okay, all right, thank you, Chair.
And I think the other issue too is if we were ever fully staffed, on the full-time side, we still don't have enough budget dollars to actually staff Meadview every day. Yeah, no, so, I mean, that's, you know, so.
Yeah, it would be every day anyway.
So kind of summarizing the employee side of the budget, let me find my mouse, there it is. Kind of bring it back to that same comparison that we've been looking at. Admin, so I did break this up a little differently because last year wasn't broken up like this, that's why you see this kind of difference. But ultimately, it's actually, the different shells are about a $1,300 change, and that's just due to some calculation of hours by month versus total amount for the year. But admin, wages, $88,260. Ops, full-time firefighter, regular pay, $244,000. POC wages of $65,000. Overtime and holiday wages for full-time is $19,402. FICA taxes, which are our Social Security and Medicare, $11,702. Workers' compensation, we got a small bump in there of 3%, so we're going to $20,501 as our placeholder. PSPS retirement, there's that savings we're realizing. They bring it down to 108. Cancer fund at 350. And then health benefits with a placeholder until we get the census of 35,000. Obviously, that'll go down, assuming number of full-time employees that we actually see next year, but that's budgeting, you know, full-time staffing again. So overall, we're seeing our personnel costs actually drop by about $9,000.
I'm confused on the top one, I think I was writing, maybe I missed something. The 5010, the salaries, wages, admin, 333,000, projected to 88,000?
No, this is everybody. This is admin and full-time firefighters last year.
Okay.
This year I did divide it up.
We
Oh,
just
I
broke
see,
it
I
out.
see, I see.
Just broke it out.
Okay, cool.
So, bottom line, what does this mean? It's better than when we started. We're to the good by 23,132. But that's not what worries me. What worries me, or where we need to really look at, you know, what we're doing and what in our, and this isn't because of how Lake Mohave is managing itself. It's because of the greater economy and Lake Mojave's source of revenue. Is right now we're looking at a deficit of 23,000, but assuming only a 1% growth in personnel and a 1% growth in other expenses, which is fair. I think our personnel assumption is, I'm being a little overly presumptive or hopeful on that. But by 5 years, we're a year away from deficit projections. So we're good. I mean, these go a ways out. We've got a lot of time to kind of address it and pay attention to it.
But you're right, that's what I've been thinking for a while, is we need to be looking at it now so we can start making adjustments. You don't wait till you're falling off the cliff before you grab a rope.
Exactly.
Can you,
Yeah, and that's the one thing is you'll see here, there's that minus 3% in assessed value. So next year we see a bump up, well, that's going to change that future projection. So there are things, but also this year we saw a windfall on PSPRS. Next year we could see that go up, and then that's going to change the assumption. Right. So it's good to see these things, but always have in the back, like you always want to kind of plan for this, but understanding there's always factors that could throw it off the next year. So if you're skimp here, you know you're really going to be skimp if you get anything bad happening.
go ahead.
When you finish this all up and you finalize it, will we get a printout of this 5-year projection?
Yep.
What would be the cost for a part-time, 5 hours a day, which is 25 hours a week, a part-time office person to man the office at the administrative office? I know we're not paying full-time benefits, but there's certain things you have to calculate, whether it be work workman's comp or that,
Social Security.
yeah.
So, $12 an hour, because that's
Yep,
minimum wage.
yep. Times 25 hours a week.
You want 25 hours a week, okay, hold on. You said 25 hours a week, I'm sorry.
Correct.
It's bro.
Nice.
So that cost will be fully loaded, which is just FICA taxes. And there will be a small amount of, there'll be a small amount of, that's what I'm looking for, workers' comp. Struggle with multitasking. That fully loaded cost would be $16,834.
So conceivably, we could build that in, given that we've got the 23,132.
Yes, but that then puts us in a deficit in 2 years, which triggers some statutory things. So we want to not, we would have to change something somewhere else.
Yeah, we're gonna be changing some.
Right.
So,
So conceivably, that could go,
yeah,
knowing that within 2 years, we might have to rethink that and take a look at that.
right.
Okay. I personally would like to see that built in. I think it's important that we advertise the hours that the administrative office is open, and that's not always the case. And I think that 3 years ago when I ran for office, that was one of the items that I was running on, was having that office open and to increase coverage in need. Those were my 2 items. So when you kind of send out another one, I'd like to see if that could be in there.
Yep. So, as I'm just kind of going through our, so to speak, to-dos or our open items on the budget, we've got the part-time admin position.
Mhm.
We have, obviously, we're waiting on, we'll need workers' comp rates, healthcare census.
Dispatch increase possible.
Yeah. Dispatch contract, commercial insurance.
I got it. Uh-oh.
Oh,
Anything else? Our general liability.
We don't know what it's going to be. We haven't done that
Our
yet.
liability insurance. We've got a 3% increase
Built in.
built in,
Okay.
but. Is there anything else? Anything specific, any specific board members want to look at from I've got Charlotte's. All right.
Now that we've said that, let's come back to the elephant in the room, which is the aging equipment that needs to be replaced.
We got 6,000 going towards it.
We've got $1 million that needs to be fixed.
We went through this a couple meetings ago. The chief was very helpful in updating items. I don't know if we prioritized what they are and how the heck are we going to pay for it.
Yeah.
I'm looking for that now. Sorry.
That's a nice tune.
No, I like it.
Let's see if I can-
Well, unfortunately, I don't see any way without incurring debt to the district. It's gonna have to be a lease option or a lease purchase if it doesn't come through a grant.
Right.
Yeah, and really even right now, there's no money for at least purchase either, so.
Right.
There's gonna have to be the decision's gonna have to be made of what to cut to be able to afford that lease purchase.
This is the updated
Oh,
spreadsheet.
yeah.
At least
This is the updated spreadsheet.
potentially, the next lease purchase would have to come after the ambulance was paid off.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
And that'll be paid off when?
2.5 years? No, wait a minute. We got 7 or 5?
Hold on a second, I'll tell you.
Because we're 2.5 into it, right? If we're 2.5 in on 5, we got 2.5. If we're 2.5 in on 7, we got longer.
Yeah.
I can't remember if we did it for 7 to keep the monthly cost down within limit.
Right.
I think we did 5, but Ben's pulled it up right here.
Well, I guess the question, Chief, would be what would you prioritize in terms of what gets replaced next?
The two biggest priorities that I see that we're looking at is going to be SCBA's and water tenders are the 2 big ticket items that are on the top, very top of the list.
It is a 7-year term, ending last payment will be July of 2024.
Out. Yeah.
So turnouts are not a priority?
No, they're not as large of a ticket priority. When you're looking at overall expenses on what things cost and what's the most expensive and what's the most needed, they're on the list.
No.
No, I'm interested. I just want to see what's possible, and email the chief, get a copy of those. We're good.
What, Ellen?
Oh, Ellen put that together.
Major
Oh,
capital.
then I'll email Ellen, Manager Capital. Email Ellen.
Major capital acquisition / replacement schedule. So if I'm looking at that list, Chief, take me to the SCBA's. The total estimate cost was approximately $130,000. On page 2, right at the top.
I'm looking at it, I want to read.
And the other one was the water tenders.
First page.
130,000 is going to get you right where we would need to be for full replacement of all SCBA's. That doesn't include the fill stations. We're currently trying to get the fill stations repaired and serviced. But those are, like I said, with the water tenders, the 2 water tenders that we have.
We only have one on here that needs replacement?
Which one?
On page 1,
Oh, I just say acquire one, we need to acquire, okay, 150,000, that's all I had on here that needed from previous information, which is 1.
Well, I don't know where you came up with the acquire, but we're up on your line where you have water tender 428, the 1995 Freightliner for $360,000. That's,
Oh, that's what it was, you need to replace that one, you said, and then
That-
acquire another one, needed another one.
that one, and then water tender 418, which is down here, three or 4 lines down from your acquire line. That one's in service. That's a 1985 International. Even though that's in service, it's still one of your top priorities for replacement.
Okay,
I mean, we rely heavily on the water tenders for firefighting purposes, water shuttles, et cetera. So those are going to be your top priority items. They're both very old vehicles and have required a lot of maintenance in the past.
so is that a 360 times 2?
You could, the 360, I got that number from a grant that is currently, we're waiting to hear back on, and that was I don't want to call it a water tender. It was almost like a pumper tender type of truck that we spec'd out, and that was $360,000. You could technically get a smaller water tender for less. It all depends on how many bells and whistles you want on it, how many gallons you want in it. The one that we spec'd was I believe was a 6-wheel drive. You know, you could spec a 2-wheel drive, you could spec 4-wheel drive. It just, the options are limitless with water tenders. As far as cost factors go and what they all have on them. You could go with the very basic bone stock, which basically the one that we have is a retired water truck from Mohave County. You know, or you can go with the all bells and whistles. But more specifically, you're probably looking at 120,000 or better just to start as a base price.
Thank you, Chief.
The 150, the acquire at 150 is a good price. That's a good starting point.
Okay. And when you were looking at, I'm looking at your figures, monthly payment.
I just divided that, that's not, well, that one includes the interest is added into it, so.
So you'd be, I'm just roughing it out, you'd be looking at about $10,000–$11,000 in monthly payments if we replaced what?
If we got two of them, 150,000, it'd be 300,000, and it'd be double this 3,000 a month payment, that'd be 6,000. Plus, for the SCBA's, if we got those for 130,000 and the monthly payment, these are all calculated just at 5 years, just to have a number to calculate. At 27.08, so you have $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a month roughly.
Well, but if you prioritize, I expect you're a magic man.
Work the numbers, Steve.
Yeah.
Well, I can work the numbers.
But if we prioritized and went with the SCBA's, you're looking at roughly $27,000 a month, a year, month.
Yeah.
For 5 years. Well, can we do that? If we just did the SCBA's first? Maybe we can get a grant for at least half of that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're basing all this on this. We're going to be paying for this all out of pocket. We have went for SCBA and turnout grants and tender grants, and we've missed the mark on them before. But that doesn't mean that we won't see one in the future.
Right. What's the one that you're intending now, the grant for equipment?
The one is through VFA.
AFG.
AFG? I get those two confused. One of them's a wildland.
CIP.
One of them's a wildland. One of them's the big
I
one.
have a question right at this point. I know we're talking about these equipments, but didn't you just say we only had $6,000?
No.
So then this is really a moot point at this point to even try to figure out how we're gonna buy this stuff. I mean, it's gonna be a few years before we can even start thinking about buying brand new. It's one of them things, when this district started, they started out with used equipment. And unfortunately, when we went bankrupt, they sold our stuff for pennies on the dollar, which really messed things up. But I don't know, I just think we're wasting our time because it's almost 2 o'clock and
I'm just trying to get a figure because we have a reserve. And that's certainly something we don't want to touch if we don't have to, but if we have to.
The SCBA's are safety equipment.
sure, I agree on that. That's something that's, to me, that's the higher priority than trying to buy a tender or
Right, that's why I was
any of
looking
that,
at
so.
that. So
Well, that's why I said those are the two top, you know, when I look at it, those are the two top priorities, is the water tender and SCBA. Turnouts are inexpensive enough to where we can replace a few every year. The SCBA's, you can't just buy one, you have to buy the whole thing. And you can't just buy part of the water tender, you gotta buy the whole thing. So when you look at those expenses, it's how you buy those and how you get those. And I put in, through the 100 Club, hopefully we'll see 4 sets of turnouts through the 100 Club. There's little or smaller grants that we could look at getting a few turnouts here and there, rather than going for the whole boat. And turnouts is #1 safety equipment, but SCBA's comes above that, with the age of the SCBA's that the district has, and what needs to be replaced.
So you're looking at roughly $32,400 for the year using that 2,700 number. The other thing, you know, that we're looking at in replacing the chief's retiring, so we need to be looking at how are we going to handle that.
Right.
And We don't have figures yet. We don't know if there'll be a contract service for that with another agency.
Right.
We don't know if, looking to do whether a part-time chief, with perhaps other personnel beneath that part-time chief that can handle other activities.
Day-to-day duties kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, so that may come into play in terms of, and we don't have that yet. I know we don't
Right.
and you don't, but that may come into play.
And I think so a couple things is some of the discussions I'm hearing is, and I understand there are some safety equipment needs and things of that probably have to happen, are definitely more on those wants versus needs. I'm sorry, needs versus wants. We can't afford to take on any lease purchase debt. I mean, the projections right there show you we don't have the money in our operating budget to take that on. Our best bet is to not pay interest and agree to take a chunk of our reserve money and buy something outright. If we can't get it by any other means, and frankly, we have to look for any other means first. And then when you're looking at the second thing that was just asked about was the chief search, or not the chief search, but what there's different options you're looking at as far as fulfilling, the chief's role going forward. Understand that right now in this budget, you've got, I would say probably close about, assuming with healthcare and everything, you're probably closer to $95,000 is what you have in the budget for the chief. So.
That would be full-time chief with benefits.
Right. But that's kind of our max.
Right.
And that's got to include everything. That's got to include roll-ups and all of that. So although we don't know what that number is, and it sounds like there are things in the horizon that could potentially be, or options that could be cheaper, especially if it is a contract type thing. But realize that's kind of, if we go above that number, then you're not cutting them from somewhere else to be able to fund that. So I know you've got a meeting, and I've got to get back to the valley. So those are my parting words, unless there's any other questions.
Very good.
Is there
I
any-
was really hoping we were gonna keep you around for the next meeting, just in case they have any follow-up questions with our special guest presentation and any information that may come up.
I mean, I will be available telephonically, as long as I'm not in that one
For
spot.
about the next 20
I was
miles.
gonna say, as long as I'm not in that one spot.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But that's also kind of what I'm saying, that is, here are your numbers. You know what that's why I'm also kind of set up some of those parameters, is that's what you have to work with. If you make a decision to go long-term above 95,000, you're cutting somewhere else.
Right.
And also, I think I saw the agenda online, but I don't know if you're looking at using an outsourced search agency or anything like that to find this. I've never had I'm budget related. It's our workshop. If you are looking at going out and hiring a firm to assist with the search, understand that basically you're going to, this year with where we're at on some of those other items we discussed, you'll probably be potentially pulling into savings a little bit to pay for that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Dave.
All right?
Is that all? Anybody have any questions for Dave?
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
We'll do
All
a
right.
call to the public. Anybody here have anything they want to present before we adjourn?
We have a can that we're passing around for.
Come on, guys.
No? Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Gabe.
Thank you, guys.
I move we adjourn.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm not voting, I wasn't
Oh,
here to
okay,
start it.
Okay, meeting adjourned.
What time do you have?
2:10.
2:10? Thank you.